points of perjury law. It was about how one of his blowies happened during a phone call with congressional leaders and how he came in the sink and how they did it on Easter and that thing he did with the cigar. Spoiler alert, if you're too young to know, don't ask. Same thing with Trump today. Joe Sixpack is not going to take the time to wrap his head around how the statute of limitations applies to a misdemeanor of falsifying business records if it involves a violation of state election law and a second crime involving a federal campaign conditional on the residential status of the defendant.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, September the 18th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have my take, rules for Patriots, rules for Retrogrades, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, bishop-barron, leo-terrell, Fox News, and former President Donald Trump presenting the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now There's No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Love locally, trade globally. Russ Roberts. Most of us have heard the expression or seen the bumper sticker, think globally, act locally. The intent for some may be benign, but the meaning is generally that our mindset ought to be on a global betterment, and we ought to do so with local stewardship that protects global interest, especially the environment. Robert's twist on the misguided bumper sticker adds exponentially more wisdom and practicality. We love most those who are closest to us, and they love us the most in return. Strangers in a strange land cannot love us because they do not know us. It is an empty platitude to talk about love in a generic and impersonal manner, devoid of relationship, commitment, and sacrifice. And in the second half of Robert's revision, we get the proper behavior for those who actually do want to impact global betterment, the practice of free exchange. Societies benefit one another when they trade with one another, and real love and meaningful relationships happen in our most local of bonds and ties. This is not controversial, but has somehow been ignored as we have sought to replace these concepts with bubblegum ideology that gets both the local and global part wrong.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Chapter 11, Mental Contagion and Mass Delusion. During disturbed times such as these, the thoughts of everyone follow the diplomatic play going on at the various political conferences. It would be worthwhile to investigate whether it is possible for leaders of nations to arrive at a common understanding as a result of mutual exchange of words, ideas, and the negotiating of treaties. Yet the various cultures in the world and the different ideologies not only speak different languages, but even their ways of thinking are different. Unobtrusively, our personal past and our cultural environment creep into our thinking habits. Our feelings and thoughts are conditioned and coerced by various social influences. It is already possible to bring to surface some of the illusions and prejudices people have about one another. We may say that the special environments in which people develop and the habits they build up foster subtle illusions and delusions in persons, of which they are, for the most part, unaware. Through research in the field, anthropology and psychology have been able to compare different ideologies in people by observing the growth of the wholesome and the unwholesome in the child, in groups, in tribes, and lastly, in nations. The findings call to our attention the difficult art of argument in situations where there is scarcely any common ground of communication and understanding. In a study on mental coercion, we have to trace some of these mass psychological influences which condition our attitude in life.
And that was Mental Contagion and Mass Delusion from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 20. All retrograde youth opting against the religious life must be raised so as to be disposed to marry as young as possible and to procreate abundantly. Retrogrades should consider this the biological solution to widespread political and moral problems. Radicals are constitutionally sterile and can easily be beaten demographically by the provision of an abundant new retrograde generation in 15 or 20 years. Simply put, we outbreed the radicals. Today's ubiquity of sterility-promoting radical boomerisms embodies the moral decadence presently popular in society. The preponderance of today's culture of death, wait until your 30s philosophy regarding family planning, has yielded small, materialistic families with manufactured, unnatural expectations regarding the amount of wealth required to begin a family. The radical worldview has brainwashed virtually all of society that each and every responsibly birthed newborn requires his own, pre-appointed bedroom, cellular data plan, college fund, and career path. Without these already in place before baby's arrival, radical boomerisms instruct us mother and father are just breeding like rabbits. On the contrary, parents of large families well understand that kids love sharing bedrooms. Smartphone ownership and screen time destroy kids' imaginations and attention spans. College and career should be mapped out not in infancy or elementary school, but rather according to the established merits of middle and high school students. In other words, a man's career and wealth can afford to mature gradually, as his family does. Poverty, not to be confused with destitution, and thrifty living, is good for a love-struck married couple fresh out of high school or college. There is plenty of time for their bank account to develop organically as their family grows. A single newborn baby or two proves remarkably cheap to care for. The radicals, of course, are up against the facts of nature. The likelihood of infertility has almost tripled if a couple waits to conceive until 30 years of age, compared against the same couple's rate at 20 years of age. Science does not lie. The human body's peak fertility occurs at 20 years old for a biological reason. Bear in mind, this is the average age of a college sophomore. If only humanity were to return to a non-manufactured, non-contrived, natural family planning by heeding the anatomical physiological science on this matter, then young men and women would certainly rise to the occasion. Imagine how different a culture of 20-year-old first-time parents would look from a culture of 30-year-old first-timers. Such widespread cultural expectations would be prospective in the sense that teens would customarily make radically different choices in anticipation of real adulthood beginning a decade prior to its present presumed starting point. Arrested development, which its perpetual teenagehood, would be stopped in its tracks. Retrogrades have been mostly blind to the fact that an aggressive approach to the bio-solution is a guaranteed path to eventual victory over the radicals. Apart from the opportune statecraft implied by the retrograde bio-solution, the benefits which accrue to the young marrieds are plenary. When the sacrament of marriage is practiced properly and timely, men avoid the near certain fate of becoming offbeat, self-obsessed, and lecherous, a fate which awaits perpetually single men as an eventuality. Women avoid the terminus of extended female singlehood, growing shrill, insecure, and officious as they age without a spouse. Women who wed young, virtuous men customarily avoid these vicious qualities of resentment, since they are not habitually looking down their noses upon perverted, morally base husbands who formed lecherous habits in the 20s and 30s. Conversely, when a couple marries young, the man and the woman grow up in the virtues together in the adventurous milieu of the benign financial poverty of youth. Fresh on their journey, the young couple will form good lifelong habits together. Salutary marital habits of teamwork and specialized labor were designed by human biology and the human lifespan to be inculcated in the late teens or early 20s, rather than in the late 20s or early 30s, by which time bad habits have already solidified. A fruit must be picked when it is ripe, not long before or after. Human beings simply aren't open to begin marital teamwork when they get too old. After all, the law of opportunity cost dictates that couples who wait until the 30s to marry may only have so many kids, even if they envision having large families. Having a truly large family mandates an early start. An early start, in turn, mandates purposeful courtship. To initiate courtship, young men should clearly, plainly, directly ask young women for one-on-one dates. The request should be clear, specifically romantic in orientation, and plainly committal. Dinner and a wholesome activity should be expressed as on offer. For their part, young women should clearly, plainly, and directly accept the invitation by young men they are interested in. Just as the offer should be unconditional, so should the young woman's acceptance be. Young women should not request a group hangout, a pre-date coffee or lunch, or any condition precedent to the date. These all constitute breaches of nature. Like matrimony, the first date necessarily involves two, and only two people, some calculated risk, unmitigated mutual interest, and mutual commitment. If any of these mitigators appear necessary to the young woman, she should simply and politely decline the young man's invitation. Courtship should last only as long, no longer, as the man reasonably requires in order to discern his compatibility with the woman, and then to tender to her a timely marriage proposal. Such a period of discernment should occupy a varying span of months in duration, not years. As with the first date, the young woman should not condition her proposal acceptance or denial. All her relatives, presumably influenced by boomerisms, will certainly admonish her that she hasn't known him long enough. As noted above, culture of death boomerisms now advise youth to date for the greater part of a decade. If accordingly she feels inclined to request more time, she should simply and graciously reject his proposal. If this rule is followed meticulously, Western dating and marriage will begin to make sense again. A return to classical courtship and prompt marriage will restore the Christian dignity of intersex relations. More importantly still, it will restore sanity to the home and the state.
And that was Rule 20 of Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots. And it's I believe, the introduction by Steve-deace.
Introduction. They shoved another establishment hack down our throats in 2012, and we lost again. The names change, George Ford or Mitt McDowell, but the results remain the same. Disaster for the Republican Party, but far more importantly, disaster for the country. Like many of you, I'm sadly not surprised, because the Republican Party has lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 elections. But that won't deter the Republican Party establishment from trying to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory yet again, and again, and again. Losing is in these people's DNA. They'll try to blow 2014 before we even get to 2016. The only reason they didn't blow it in 2010 is because the Tea Party, God bless them, dragged them kicking and screaming across the finish line. If we're going to stop them from blowing more elections, and thus finishing off whatever is left of our beloved constitutional republic, we're going to need as many people as possible to read this book. See, the very same people that have shoved these electable losers down our throats for decades now have reemerged from their beltway spider holes to tell us that Mitt Romney lost because, get this, he was too conservative. I know. I laughed out loud too. Right before I realized the joke is really on us, our children, and our grandchildren. So this is really no laughing matter. Now these same losers are saying we have to abandon whatever shred of principled conservatism actually still exists within the Republican Party leadership in order to win. Yet we know that is a pernicious lie. Romney did everything the cynical Karl Rove wing of the party says Republicans have to do to win. He abandoned his conservative base when he said the grassroots uprising standing up for Chick-fil-A was, quote, not a part of my campaign. And he joined the liberal dogpile on Todd Akin. He played it safe and didn't offer any major tax or entitlement reform ideas to avoid the fiscal cliff out of fear of being demagogued. He ran on platitudes and talked more about how bad President Obama is rather than what plans for the future he had. He then became the first Republican presidential nominee to ever run pro-child-killing television ads, which aired in battleground states like Virginia, Ohio, and Iowa, all of which Romney lost, by the way. Romney also won key independents in several battleground states, and he still lost. If anything good can come from getting our butts kicked in 2012, it's that we've finally been able to debunk several lies and clever myths of the Republican Party's wretched ruling class. Lie and clever myth number 1. Republicans lose elections because they're too conservative, so independents side with Democrats. Truth. Romney won independent voters in the crucial swing battleground states of Virginia and Ohio, 2 of the 3 states he had to win the presidency. In Florida, the other key battleground state Romney had to have, he actually did 8 points better among independents than John McCain did in 2008. In Colorado, Romney won independents by 7 points after McCain lost independents in Colorado by 8 points in 2008. Translation, Romney did exactly what he had to do with independents and still lost. Reverse the outcome in Colorado, Florida, Ohio, and Virginia, and Romney is elected president of the United States. Lie and clever myth number 2. Romney lost because of the GOP's alleged war on women, so that means we can't be pro-life anymore. Truth. What the GOP really has is a diversity problem. White voters in every demographic, including women and young voters, voted for Romney. Let me repeat that. A majority of white voters, regardless of age and gender, voted Republican in the 2012 presidential election. Romney won white women by 14 points. A massive turnout of blacks and Latinos, the Democrat base, determined the election and gave Obama the support he needed to win. The Democrats won by doing a better job than the Republicans of turning out their base. Which leads me to my next point. Lie and clever myth number 3. The Republicans energized their base, but it's just shrinking, so the party has to move left. Truth. Promises that a swing of 17 million evangelicals that didn't vote in 2008 would show up and swing the 2012 election in Romney's favor never panned out. The reality is 2.5 million fewer evangelicals voted in 2012 than 2008. Fewer Catholics voted in 2012 than 2008 as well, despite the presence of 2 Catholic vice presidential candidates. 6.4 million evangelicals actually voted for Obama. In the crucial battleground state of Ohio, Obama actually improved his white evangelical turnout by 8% compared to 2008. I'm sure much of that is due to Obama's bailout of the auto industry there, which didn't stop Detroit from going bankrupt, but Romney running pro-child killing television ads probably didn't endear him to pro-life voters either. Romney also ran those pro-child killing television ads in Virginia, and CNN's exit polls found the evangelical turnout there declined by 7% compared to 2008. Yes, Romney did get the same hefty percentage of evangelical voters that George W. Bush got in his victorious 2004 campaign, but the turnout wasn't large enough. Apparently, all the efforts to distort Romney's far-left record as governor of Massachusetts and make him into some kind of conservative superhero at the same time he's shunning his base and flip-flopping on their issues did not pay off. Finally, get this, Romney even did worse among his fellow Mormons than George W. Bush did in 2004, if you can believe that. Romney lost the election in the end because his base wasn't as energized as Obama's. All the so-called skewed polling that pointed to an Obama turnout of Democrats similar to 2008 turned out to be correct. If you count the 2.5 million fewer evangelicals that voted compared to 2008, and the 6.4 million evangelicals that voted for Obama, a future Republican nominee has almost 9 million potential new voters in 2016, if he actually reaches out to them credibly and consistently. Adding a plurality of those 9 million voters to Romney's 2012 coalition would make the Republican nominee virtually unbeatable in 2016 or any other future election. But to accomplish that feat, he or she will have to make them feel welcome in the party and assure them that he or she shares their courage of conviction. But it's not just evangelicals that are tired of voting against Democrats rather than voting for Republicans. They are just one segment of the at least 6 million people that traditionally lean Republican and voted in 2008, but didn't vote in 2012. Then there were those that didn't stay home, but cast a protest vote instead. Like the almost 45,000 liberty-loving Floridians that voted for Libertarian Party candidate Gary Johnson and provided 60% of Obama's 2012 margin for victory in that swing state. Then there's the emerging libertarian influence within the GOP cultivated by Ron and Rand Paul. These people are tired of voting for a lesser form of socialism under the Republican Party banner. And several of them I know were Ron Paul or bust voters in 2012. They never saw Romney as a true champion of limited government, so they didn't vote for him. Persistent attempts in the future to sell these patriots on milquetoast or to scare them into voting against dastardly Democrats may result in those doing the selling being handsomely rewarded by the Republican ruling class. But it likely will also result in more of them staying home, and thus another Republican election loss. The real numbers show people are growing increasingly tired of being asked to cast votes they know they won't be proud of later. As frustration with the status quo grows, huge names like Sarah Palin are openly talking about the possibility of a third party, as is one of the biggest conservative websites in the country, Red State. Modernization of the Republican Party is one thing, but moderation is another. Compromise is one thing, but capitulation is another. What we need to do is make a list of everyone in the alleged conservative media that peddles party establishment propaganda or went on Fox News guaranteeing a Romney victory and told us how skewed all the mainstream media polls were when in the last 3 presidential elections they've been exactly right, and resolve never to trust these false prophets again. Frankly, we should have known better than to trust them in the first place. During the past 2 primary cycles, didn't we watch many of these same people tell us Mike Huckabee was a Christian socialist, Ron Paul was a certifiable nutcase, Rick Santorum was a pro-life statist, and Newt Gingrich opposed the very Reagan Revolution he was a foot soldier in? Meanwhile, the establishment choice, Willard Romney, he could tiptoe between the raindrops without getting wet. The people trashing and slandering non-establishment candidates in primaries are the very same people that tell conservatives we have to be team players. See that as stand for nothing. And yet they attack us like they would never attack liberals. Perhaps if Romney had gone after the president in the final 2 debates on Benghazi, the way he went after the Gingrich and Santorums of the world in the primary, he wouldn't have lost the election. But now it's time to move forward. I recently spoke to a group of grassroots conservative activists at the Institute on the Constitution in Baltimore and shared with them that I believe we are a movement in a generational transition. On one hand, there is the Reagan generation, and my generation on the other. The Reagan generation sees how much freedom and liberty has been lost since Reagan, and is trying to do whatever they can to hold on to whatever is left before it's completely lost. The hope is that if we hold on long enough and defeat Democrats with any, and by any we sadly mean any, Republican, we can create another perfect storm. And it will be morning in America again. But my generation doesn't have that nostalgia for the Reagan era because we were growing up and not really paying attention or weren't even born at all. Now that we are paying attention, we don't see the country in the context of what has been lost, but rather how much ground needs to be gained. We are not seeing this purely in the context of the next election cycle. We're seeing this in a generational cycle, which is why we oppose compromises on important issues like life and the debt ceiling. We don't really care what the ruling class and its brigade of hand-wringers masquerading as pundits and pollsters think, because we're the ones that will pick up the long-term tab for the financial, moral, and spiritual brokenness of the country long after they're all 6 feet under. We're looking at the next 40 years, not just the next 4. Ironically, though we may not be a part of the Reagan generation, we have the same perspective Reagan had in 1976, when he said the Republican Party ought to stand for something other than becoming more like Democrats. And there should be no more pale pastels, but bold colors instead. Eventually, my generation is going to get its chance to lead because we have time on our side. Nobody lives forever. When we do get our chance to lead, and it may be sooner rather than later, we need to learn the lessons of recent failures, lest we fail our children and grandchildren. This election provided plenty of those hard lessons, but also a useful roadmap on how to win the future. Number 1, the truth still sets us free. Yes, the mainstream media favors liberals, but just giving our yin to their yang doesn't produce truth. It just produces another echo chamber. I couldn't believe how many conservatives I know and trust who really thought Romney was going to win, and win convincingly, despite the fact several polling models with a 96% accuracy rate in the past two presidential elections said otherwise. Our version of propaganda is no truer than their version of propaganda. I say this in love, but brothers and sisters, some of our brethren are dangerously close to becoming the magically thinking, virtual reality living creatures we accuse the Democrat base of being. If we want to advance truth, we need to believe the truth ourselves, even when it's inconvenient. And the truth is, we are no longer the dominant view in the culture, and we have some work to do to change that. Point number 2, hypocrisy doesn't sell. Pollster Scott Rasmussen once told me the single most unpopular piece of legislation in American history was the, in my opinion, criminal TARP bailout of 2008. Yet we nominated a candidate who was for it in the next presidential election. Good luck going to Toledo and telling Ohioans making $15 an hour who think their job was saved by the auto industry bailout that they didn't deserve a government handout, but Merrill Lynch and Goldman Sachs did. Sometimes we just write the Democrats' commercials for them. Point number 3, cast a vision. After the Democrats lost an election in 2004 they probably shouldn't have lost, the more principled progressive wing of the party took over. The result was an anti-Bush liberal uprising in 2006, similar to the anti-Obama Tea Party uprising of 2010. Next, the new progressives defeated the more pragmatic Clintons head-to-head in a presidential primary. Obama ran for president, promising his base he would move the ball down the field for them with their crown jewel legislation, Obamacare. He then went right back to that base in 2012 and worked the exact same get-out-the-vote model that worked in 2008. He embraced his base, even on social issues, both in the White House and at his convention. While we were scoffing at him for never moderating, Obama was energizing his base all along in preparation for a tough re-election. The progressives cast a vision that took more than one election cycle. They followed it through, and then they won. They never detoured, no matter what the facts were on the ground, because they have a courage of their conviction that their vision is what's best for the country. They wanted to win to govern. The Republican ruling class wants to govern to win.
And that's the first part of the introduction to Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve-Deace. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
What's the greatest sin? It's not lust. We tend to think that way, but it's not. And the great spiritual masters, the capital sin of capital sins is pride. Why? Because pride means I turn myself into God. Therefore, the greatest virtue is humility. When I lower myself in the presence of God, I open myself to the influence of God. Easy? Not last time I checked. We're all prideful. We all resist the path that's opened up to us by humility. But by following that path, we come to be healed.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Ashley, thank you very much indeed. All right, folks, now this. The president has indeed arrived in New York City, and so have over 100,000 migrants. He likely won't see them as he drives down the east side of Manhattan for the UN summit. But what he does about them will establish migrant policy for his re-election campaign. We are told he wants to let them work. That is not going to be popular because it would make America even more of a magnet for border crossers. New York Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez appeared at a migrant center in the city Friday and was shouted down. She wants them to work. She's not been to the border since Biden was elected, but back in 2019, she went to El Paso and accused the Trump administration of establishing, quote, concentration camps where migrants were being, quote, brutalized. Now they're in New York, flooding the schools and shelters in her district. Let me show you this new video. A trainload of migrants happily on their way to America. Clearly, there are more coming. And if the president says, okay, you can work, even more will come. My point is, let them work, get the taxpayer off the hook, but only after you have closed the border. Another point, the president will hold at least 2 fundraisers here whilst he's in New York. The Democrat-leading Daily News says there will be a Broadway for Biden event tonight. Tickets, $250 to $7,500 apiece. On Wednesday, Lawyers for Biden, where tickets start at $3,300. I wonder if we'll ever find out exactly who is giving money to the president, whose policies are ruining this city. The second hour of Varney just getting started.
And that was Stuart Varney's My Take, and he's, again, missing the boat here. There's no migrants. They're illegal immigrants. Words matter. We can't win an argument or fight about migrants. And we can only win an argument about illegal immigrants because that's essentially about law enforcement. And law enforcement is, if not the weak spot of the Democrats, then certainly one of them. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Leo-Terrell.
Hi, Leo 2.0 here. I'm going to tell you a true story. I'm on the corner of Purdue and Santa Monica Boulevard. There's a police station about a half block from here. I'm at a Starbucks, and as I was waiting in line, this guy walked in and started stealing items inside the store. So I grabbed the bag and took the items away from him. I told him to get out of here. He said he has to eat. I said, I'm going to call the police. He said, I don't care. The police won't show up. I took action because I cannot sit there and stand and watch someone steal thinking that he can get away with it. And for what I understand, it goes on every day at this Starbucks. So I just want America to know this is crazy. Los Angeles is crazy.
And that was Leo-Terrell. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Fox News about the Democrats' meltdown over the Biden impeachment inquiry.
So Putin's billionaire buddy wires the Biden family $3.5 billion, and then they sit down for dinner with Joe Biden, and then Biden leaves her off the sanctions list twice. Right there, you could open an impeachment inquiry. Or how about when Joe Biden flies his son to China, he comes back with a bucket of cash, and then gets on the, hey, guys, you better pay up the rest or my dad's going to get revenge on you. And what do you know? Joe Biden starts writing the communist Chinese guy's daughter's recommendations to get into Brown. And then they grease the regulatory process so the Chinese can buy an American car company. Oh, yeah, and then Hunter gets that diamond for about $75,000 that he lost. Because if Malia Obama got a diamond and then President Obama went soft on the country that gave it to him, I'm sure that would not be a big deal at all. And then who else do we have? We have Biden flies his son down to Mexico City. Hunter meets with the president of Mexico and Carlos Slim, comes back with money, and then complains, guys, I've gotten all of your clients into the White House to meet with my dad, and you haven't paid me a dime. Where's the cash? They can't answer those three situations. So I can't wait till they have to answer about the burner phones, the 20 shell companies, or Joe Biden on a voicemail saying, son, I read the Times piece about your shady deals in China. You're in the clear. Now, how would he even know if he was in the clear if he didn't know what his son did? And how do you not know what your son did if you call your son every day for the last 20 years? Hey, son, how'd you get the Porsche Panorama? Hey, son, where did you get all the money to take me to St. Croix 8 times in a row? Did you know that the Bidens vacationed in St. Croix, notorious tax shelter, 8 seasons in a row. I mean, Joe didn't pay for that. That money was coming from Hunter or from Jimmy. And Jimmy was putting his brother up at a nice Naples resort that he purchased right off the coast. Who paid for that? Jimmy's a scam artist. He doesn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, well, he didn't do anything to return the money. Well, he didn't pop the Chinese spy balloon, covered up for the lab leak. He's been covering up for all the countries that have been paying his family. So they're going to have to answer for all of this. There's a mountain of evidence that they can't confront, and they keep on saying this is the best thing that's ever happened to the Biden White House. I don't think Joe Biden believes that. So,
that was Fox News about the Dems' meltdown over the Biden impeachment inquiry. And, again, I'm, on the one hand, as an American citizen and as a pro-democracy or pro-constitutional republic kind of guy, I'm embarrassed and ashamed of Joe Biden. I'm ashamed of his family. I'm ashamed of Hunter Biden. And I wish that Joe Biden would simply resign, get out of office, and save us the humiliation that is coming with this inquiry. On the other hand, I look forward to it. I look forward to the inquiry because it's going to be as embarrassing, as humiliating, or more so for Hunter and Joe and the rest of the grifters in his family as it's going to be for the rest of America. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, former President Donald Trump awards the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Thank you very much for being here. It's a great honor. The American hero we honor today came from a farm near Albany, Kentucky. Merle was one of 11 children. He grew up during the Great Depression and dropped out of school after the 8th grade to help provide for his family. A wonderful family, but they weren't rolling in cash, right? But they were wonderful. In March of 1941, Merle enlisted in the Army and joined the 3rd Infantry Division. For 28 months straight, he fought on the front lines in 10 campaigns. He was wounded 7 times, but he couldn't stop. He loved it, and he loved our country. On the shores of Sicily, the beaches of Anzio, and the snow-covered mountains of France, he fought with everything he had to defeat the Nazi menace. In January of 1945, as the final days of the Battle of the Bulge, well-known fight. General, that was a tough one, right? Was that a tough one? They taught you that? I know you weren't there, but that was a, I hope you weren't there, otherwise. Jesus, Kelly was there. But that was a rough one. They study that one. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was engaged in a fierce battle with the Nazis in northern France. At the time, Lieutenant Connor was in a field hospital being treated for a painful hip wound, one of many, and was scheduled to be sent back home. He was wounded so often, so much, but he didn't want to go home. He snuck out of the hospital, and he made his way back to his unit. His doctors, his nurses were not happy. Lieutenant Connor wasn't done fighting yet. In fact, it wasn't even close. Soon after he arrived, he saw that it was impossible to tell the strength and position of the German. He volunteered to go to the front line and observe the enemy and to help direct fire. In order to communicate with the command post, he took a telephone and hundreds of yards of telephone wire. That was a long time ago, before we had what we have today, called a cell phone. He ran 400 yards, dodging shrapnel, bullets, Shells everywhere. Artillery trying to hit him. They saw him. They couldn't get him. He was going every different way. He looked like an NFL star, all the while laying telephone wire wherever he went. When he reached the edge of the forest, he raced 30 yards in front of the American line. Merle laid a shadow ditch, and he laid down in this hole, this shallow ditch, where they could still see him. It was only 1 foot deep. In front of the lone American soldier were 6 German tanks and hundreds of German soldiers. As bullets flew all around him, Lieutenant Connor directed artillery fire, each time successfully decimating the enemy. They knew he was there and they couldn't get him. At one point, a German soldier came within 5 yards of Lieutenant Connor before being shot and killed. For 3 hours, the bloody battle raged on. In the last attack, swarms of German soldiers rushed forward. When they were nearly on top of Lieutenant Connor, he ordered fire on his own position, exactly where he was, courageously choosing to face death in order to save his battalion and achieve victory for freedom. And those people that were with him, many of them now gone, said it was the single bravest act they've ever seen. He had shells dropped right on him. Aim at me, he said. Aim at me. Well, they missed him by feet, but he kept calling in more rounds, until the blanket of fire broke the German advance and the enemy retreated, saving so many American lives. Lieutenant Connor's courageous actions killed roughly 50 German soldiers, injured 100 more, and saved so many American lives they don't even have the count. Somehow, Lieutenant Connor survived the attack. Less than 4 months later, the Nazis surrendered. And that was a big, big day. Soon after Merle came home, his town organized a parade to celebrate his heroic deeds. One of the speakers was the legendary World War I hero, Sergeant York. You know all about Sergeant York. All my generals down, they know about Sergeant York, right? It was at this time that Pauline first caught a glimpse of her future husband. Right, Pauline? I don't think you were impressed either, were you, Pauline? She said, no, I wasn't. As she put it, I was expecting a giant of a man because he was a big hero already. And she hadn't met him, but they were giving a parade. I was asking her about it. And she expected this big, powerful guy. But when she saw Merle, he was 5'6" tops, 120 pounds. And she told her mother that little guy could not have done all of the things that they said he's done. Couldn't be possible, right? She soon saw for herself the extraordinary courage and devotion that burned like a righteous fire in his soul. It's all about the soul. Merle embodied the pure patriotic love that builds and sustains a nation. Just a few months later, Merle and Pauline were husband and wife. Together they lived, loved, and thrived through 53 years of an incredibly great marriage. Was it good or great, Pauline? It was great. That's good. Oh, boy, I'm glad she said that. We might have had to cancel the rest. That would have been terrible. She said it was great. Today, we pay tribute to this Kentucky farm boy who stared down evil with the strength of a warrior and the heart of a true hero. Lloyd Ramsey, Merle's commanding officer, described him this way: I've never seen a man with as much courage and ability as he had. I usually don't brag on my officers, but this is one officer nobody could brag enough about and do him justice. He was a real soldier. That's some quote from his commander. Lieutenant Garland Merle Connor was indeed a giant. In his daring, his devotion, and his duty, he was larger than life, and that he was. He will never, ever be forgotten. We will never forget his story. And we will always be grateful to God for giving us heroes like Merle and you two gentlemen. We didn't forget you. Two great gentlemen. And by the way, all of these great soldiers and truly brave warriors that do such an incredible job protecting the people of this country. And we mean that 100%. So everybody in uniform here today, we thank you. I would like to now ask Pauline to come and accept the Congressional Medal of Honor for her husband and for the military aid to read the citation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3rd, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to First Lieutenant Garland M. Connor, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty. First Lieutenant Garland M. Connor distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity while serving with Company K, 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division on the morning of January 24th, 1945, near the town of Hausen, France. German forces ferociously counterattacked the front left flank of the 7th Infantry Regiment with 600 infantry troops, 6 Mark VI tanks, and tank destroyers. Lieutenant Connor, having recently returned to his unit after recovering from a wound received in an earlier battle, was working as the intelligence officer in the 3rd Battalion command post at the time of the attack. Understanding the devastating effect that the advancing enemy armor could have on the battalion, Lieutenant Connor immediately volunteered to run straight into the heart of the enemy assault to get to a position from which he could direct friendly artillery on the advancing enemy forces. With complete disregard for his own safety, Lieutenant Connor maneuvered 400 yards through the enemy artillery fire that destroyed trees in his path and rained shrapnel all around him, while unrolling telephone wire needed to communicate with the battalion command post. Upon reaching the battalion's front line, he continued to move forward under the enemy assault to a position 30 yards in front of the defending United States forces, where he plunged into a shallow ditch that provided minimal protection from the advancing enemy's heavy machine gun and small arms fire. With rounds impacting all around him, Lieutenant Connor calmly directed multiple fire missions, adjusting round after round of artillery from his prone position until the enemy was forced to halt its advance and seek cover behind a nearby dike. For 3 hours, Lieutenant Connor remained in his compromised position, enduring the repeated onslaught of German infantry, which at one point advanced to within 5 yards of his position. As German infantry regrouped and began to mass in an overwhelming assault, Lieutenant Connor ordered friendly artillery to concentrate directly on his own position, having resolved to die if necessary to destroy the enemy advance. Ignoring the friendly artillery shells blanketing his position and exploding mere feet from him, Lieutenant Connor continued to direct artillery fire on the enemy assault swarming around him until the German attack was finally broken. By his heroism and disregard for his own life, Lieutenant Connor stopped the enemy advance. The artillery he expertly directed, while under constant enemy fire, killed approximately 50 German soldiers and wounded an estimated 100 more, preventing what would have undoubtedly been heavy friendly casualties. His actions are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the United States Army.
Let us pray. Almighty God, I ask that these moments here together and the heroic acts of Lieutenant Garland Connor become for us a lifetime of strength. We ask you always for your continued presence for all of our American heroes serving home and abroad in military service. Continue to pour your wisdom on our leaders and fill Pauline Connor, her family, and our entire nation with your peace today and always. Amen.
And that was the former President Trump awarding the Medal of Honor to a World War II veteran. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.